The Survivor Series. Since its debut in 1987, the show has had a long and at times controversial history. The show has featured many new beginnings and at times bitter ends. And in recent years, the pay-per-view has taken on kind of the black sheep of the pay-per-view family role. But every time I think the concept is dead and maybe the show ought to be retired and replaced with a more fun idea like, I don't know, Oops All Piranha Tank matches, they pull me back in with plenty of awesome moments. Far too many to condense into one list, but damn it, I'm gonna try. This week, I'm gonna rank them. My picks for the top 8 best Survivor Series moments of all time. Number 8, Team Austin vs. Team Bischoff, Survivor Series 2003. It took a while for many WWE fans to get over the shock of seeing Eric Bischoff on their TV screens every Monday, and longer still for them to finally get the catharsis they'd been craving. In February of 2003, Stone Cold Steve Austin came back to the company after his infamous walkout the previous year. But as an in-ring competitor, his days were numbered due to years of injuries taking their toll. He came back guns blazing as he got to hit Eric Bischoff with a bunch of stunners as payback for his WCW firing, but it wouldn't be the last time their paths would cross. Soon after WrestleMania 19, when he had his last match for nearly 20 years, Stone Cold was given a new role as co-general manager alongside Bischoff, which was sure to create some wacky power struggles. Austin was forbidden from getting physical with other wrestlers unless physically provoked himself, and after months of tension brewing, it all came to a head at the Survivor Series. If Steve Austin's team won, the restriction would be lifted, but if Eric Bischoff's team won, then Austin was gone. And so Shawn Michaels, Rob Van Dam, Booker T, and the Dudleys defended Stone Cold's honor as they took on Eazy-E's team of Chris Jericho, Christian, Randy Orton, Scott Steiner, and Mark Henry. And ooh boy folks, this match was a real humdinger. It's gone down as one of the greatest elimination matches in Survivor Series history. Down 3 against 1 and so bloody he practically broke the Muta scale, HBK toughed it out in an attempt to save the career of Stone Cold in a building full of their fellow Texans. Fans were taken on an emotional journey of highs and lows, and after coming so close, Michaels was laid out with a Batista powerbomb, allowing young Randy Orton to become the winner and sole survivor. A defeated Austin helped Shawn to his feet and gave an emotional speech, saying it felt justified that his career both began and ended in Dallas, Texas. Even though the gravity of the situation was undone weeks later when Austin came back as the Sheriff of Raw, this moment at Survivor Series was perfect. It was a fantastic match that served as a great showcase for Michaels. It further built Orton's reputation as a future legend and gave Stone Cold the proper send-off he deserved. Number 7, the WWF vs. the Alliance, winner take all, Survivor Series 2001. Now this entry might surprise some of you considering how long I've lambasted the Invasion storyline, and my opinions on that angle have not changed. Go watch my Vengeance 2001 review for more details on that. But for all its faults, at least the final act was fun to watch. Survivor Series 2001 saw the end of a story that began the week before WrestleMania 17, when the WWF purchased WCW. Many fans' hopes for big dream matches were dashed when most of WCW's big names didn't come along for the initial ride, and it wasn't long before the WWF had a hard time nailing down just what they wanted to do with the brand. So they merged it with ECW, called it the Alliance, and had them fight the WWF locker room in a vague, undefined battle for supremacy, which is a phrase you might hear me say a lot of when I get to the worst Survivor Series moments. By November, any semblance of the spirit of WCW or ECW was gone, with defections aplenty and fan interest waning. Things lurched to the Survivor Series as Team WWF faced the Alliance in an elimination showdown. Though the ending was a foregone conclusion, they did their damnedest to keep things interesting for those 45 minutes. You may be shocked to learn that the final 4 in the match were all WWE guys. And yeah, Chris Jericho and Stone Cold were in WCW before the Federation, but that's not what we're talking about here. It all came down to The Rock and Steve Austin, which really raised the stakes in an otherwise weak storyline. After 2 referee bumps and a double defection by Kurt Angle, The Rock beat the Rattlesnake, winning the war for the Federation. The Invasion storyline did leave a lot of money on the table. Some might say you could extend this thing to WrestleMania 18 if they played their cards right. Still, this was a hasty but well-executed end and kind of served as a nice reset button for the WWF. The angle may have started with a whimper that persisted all summer and autumn, but at least it ended with a bang. Number 6. Bret Hart vs. Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels vs. Sid, Survivor Series 1996. 96 was a rough year for the WWF. WCW was on top of their game as the NWO storyline was gaining momentum, and Nitro became the cool show to watch. Petrified that Bret Hart would go the way of guys like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, Vince McMahon wheeled a big load of money to Bret's front lawn in Canada, essentially begging him to stay. Bret agreed and came back after taking several months off, but did so on the condition that his return program be with Steve Austin, in an attempt to get this rising star to the next level. Meanwhile, the man who beat Bret for the title back at WrestleMania 12 was having a trying time of things as champion. HBK's reign wasn't setting the world on fire, as matches against guys like Davey Boy Smith and Vader were somewhat disappointing. And while that was going on, the vocal male contingent of the audience was very clearly turning on him. Both he and Bret had a lot to prove in their matches at Survivor Series 96 versus Sid and Stone Cold, respectively. Both matches over-delivered, with Bret and Austin delivering a classic wrestling match that ended with Bret using veteran savvy to come out on top, while the WWF title match descended into absolute chaos as Sid whomped Jose Lothario with a ringside camera before drilling Shawn to the mat with a powerbomb to win the title, as the crowd cheered his actions against the top babyface champion. While they certainly didn't turn the company's fortunes around overnight, these two epic matches at Survivor Series 96 set the Federation on the path to getting their cool back. Number 5. The first Elimination Chamber match, Survivor Series 2002. Wow, when you think about it, the Eric Bischoff era of Raw was pretty beneficial for the Survivor Series. In storyline, General Manager Bischoff wanted to top Smackdown's brutal Hell in a Cell match the previous month at No Mercy, and therefore created the Elimination Chamber. Part Cell, part Royal Rumble, and part War Games. Though without context, the name kind of sounds like an intense brand of porta potties. It was Triple H himself who devised the concept, drawing the structure out on a napkin. No one in the match, including Hunter himself, had actually seen the structure until the day of at Madison Square Garden, and it became obvious rather quickly that the chamber had not been built with the safety of the participants in mind. All steel, no rubber, no give, and no way for H, Kane, RVD, Booker T, Chris Jericho, or Shawn Michaels to walk away completely unscathed. Things got off to a bad start when a 5-star frog splash off a chamber pod ended with RVD's knee colliding with Triple H's throat, partially crushing his windpipe. Despite having to gasp for air for the rest of the match, he did make it all the way to the end, so kudos to Triple H for that, but that would not be the match's only stumbling block. For whatever reason, Kane's pod opened before Shawn's, which was not part of the plan, so much of the match from that point forward had to be called on the fly. Fans, of course, were none the wiser and were delighted when the Heartbreak Kid finally entered and became the Comeback Kid, eliminating Triple H to become the World Heavyweight Champion 6 years after losing the WWF title in the same building. It's just too bad his incomplete tights had to spoil the moment. After a maiden voyage like that, it's no wonder the Elimination Chamber became one of WWE's most enduring signature matches. Luckily, the company took their workers' health and well-being into account when they built a new, safer chamber in 2017. Number 4. Goldberg destroys Brock Lesnar, Survivor Series 2016. A lot of fans were surprised and perhaps a little annoyed when it was announced that Bill Goldberg would make his return to WWE in the fall of 2016 to coincide with the release of their latest video game. To me, the idea seemed doomed to fail. His run in 2003 was the opposite of good, and now everyone was 13 years older. Couldn't we just move on from trying to resurrect WCW brands? To make things even more interesting, Goldberg went straight to the top upon his return, pitted against Brock Lesnar in the main event of Survivor Series. The last time the two had faced off, they were booed out of MSG due to both men running out of fucks to give. And at this point, Lesnar was positioned as the final boss of WWE. Nobody could beat him. It seemed like Goldberg was just going to get a fat payday to have another boring match. I mean, how lazy and unimaginative... Okay then. It was shocking, it was mesmerizing, it was a surge of electricity at a time where it didn't really feel like anything could happen in WWE. In a matter of minutes, Goldberg completely restored his superstar aura with the quick destruction of the seemingly invincible Brock Lesnar. But one of the fingers on that monkey's paw curled up that day, as all that new momentum for Goldberg would lead to the sudden end of Kevin Owens' run as Universal Champion before WrestleMania 33. Number 3. The Deadly Game, Survivor Series 1998. From a nostalgic perspective, this show is very near and dear to my heart. 98 was my first year as a wrestling fan, and by this point, I was all wrapped up in the drama of the WWF. And this show, man, it shattered my young little mind. In September of 98, Vince McMahon finally succeeded in getting the championship off of Steve Austin. After failing to get a clean winner between Undertaker and Kane at Judgment Day, a one-night 16-man tournament was held to crown a new champion at Survivor Series. Throughout the night, fans followed the journeys of Mankind and The Rock as they each made their way to the finals. Mrs. Foley's baby boy, who was publicly endorsed by McMahon, was given a softball in Dwayne Gill in the first round and got help beating Austin in the semifinals, while The Rock, who had been surging in popularity for months after leaving the nation, had an arguably tougher-looking path to the final round. The road was paved with twists and turns, stunning betrayals, and lucky breaks that kept the crowd hanging on every match. Finally, in the main event, the company executed the most effective reenactment of the Montreal Screwjob they would ever do when Vince commanded the timekeeper to ring the bell while Rocky applied his terrible sharpshooter to Mankind. Suddenly, it all became clear. It was The Rock who was Vince's choice for corporate champion, with Mankind his unwitting pawn. The Rock's impending face turn was thrown out the window for a new level of heat, creating a new main event heel, a new main event face in Mick Foley, and setting up money matches for months and years to come. But at the time, folks, believe me, I was devastated! The 98 Survivor Series is a shining example of a one-night story done right, the culmination of months of build with a swerve that left fans satisfied and yearning for more instead of making them feel ripped off or insulted. Mr. Russo, take your bow for this one. Number 2. The Montreal Screwjob, Survivor Series 1997. I'm not here to break this topic down in depth. It's been done to death. I'm never going to do it, but you have to hear me out on this one. Firstly, the Screwjob got people talking. From the moment Lex Luger showed up on the first Nitro, WCW dominated the conversation amongst fans for the better part of 2 years. What went down in Montreal completely flipped the script, as fans wanted to see how the Federation would respond and react to this very public and acrimonious exit by Bret Hart. Second of all, it was real. It was the largest and most public display of the worlds of kayfabe and reality colliding in this ugly, confusing way. Only the curtain call from the year before comes anywhere close to this, but at least that was a house show. It was not meant to be seen outside of that audience, as opposed to the main event of a major pay-per-view. In an era where awareness of backstage goings-on in wrestling was still relatively limited, this event shone a spotlight on the whole enterprise. This was a genuine moment that struck a nerve not only with fans, but everyone in the business as well. Lastly, and some would say most essentially, it spawned one of the greatest heel characters in history in Mr. McMahon. Even if they had seen his stuff in Memphis from a few years earlier, no one would have guessed that Vince McMahon would have the inspiration or even the nerve to abandon his long-standing square lead announcer persona and reveal his true self as the Federation's manipulative and vindictive owner. His feud with Steve Austin that soon followed helped catapult the WWF to heights of pop culture relevance it hadn't seen before or since. So yes, for all its faults, there was a lot of good that came from the rubble of that political train wreck. Before I declare my number one pick, here are a few honorable mentions. Raw vs. Smackdown vs. NXT, Survivor Series 2019. For years, fans who followed both NXT and main roster television lived with eternal dread that their favorite stars from the black and yellow brand would be ruined upon being called up. But it was around this time where that perception began to change. By this point, NXT had developed a rabid following from hardcore wrestling fans by building their version of a super indie. Its popularity was put to the test on an episode of Smackdown that underwent massive rewrites since most of the roster was still flying home from Saudi Arabia by bell time. The stars of NXT invaded the show and declared it was time for war at the 2019 Survivor Series. Most of the matches featured the best of all three brands competing against each other. There were triple threats involving similar champions across the three shows, as well as men's and women's elimination matches. And in the end, NXT cleaned up, winning 4 matches to Raw's 2 and SmackDown's 1. Though WWE still had no idea what brand supremacy actually meant, this showing of domination over Raw and SmackDown gave a huge boost of legitimacy to NXT and made it feel like a big deal, which predictably did not last long. The Tag Team Elimination Match, Survivor Series 1987. The inaugural Survivor Series pay-per-view, though spiteful in its origins, was a massive success by presenting what was a relatively unique concept at the time. Except perhaps for the main event, the most exciting match of the night was the Tag Team Elimination Match, where 10 teams, that's right, 10 teams, 20 men faced off. The action was rapid fire, where one elimination meant that both members of the team were gone. Fans of the underdog were pleasantly surprised to see two upstart teams in the Killer Bees and the Young Stallions win the day in this 40-minute low-key classic, eliminating the Hart Foundation and the Islanders to earn the victory. The McMahons versus the Brothers of Destruction, Survivor Series 2003. Whether coincidence or not, The Undertaker and Kane were often booked in eerily similar storylines while on separate shows during the first brand split. As I mentioned in my No Mercy 02 review, Kane was battling accusations of murder and necrophilia on Raw, while the Dead Man was charged with being an adulterer on Smackdown. Kane's career suffered a permanent bruise from his storyline, while lots of folks forgot about this wrinkle of Biker Taker's run. Lucky! Fast forward to the following year on Raw, where Kane lost his mask, went nuts, no pun intended, and entered a psychotic and violent feud with Shane McMahon. Whereas on SmackDown, Papa Vince meddled in Taker's business one too many times and landed himself in the former champ's crosshairs. Both feuds reached their apex at the 03 Survivor Series, an ambulance match for Shane and Kane, a buried live match for Vince and Taker. The gimmicks, the crazy high spots, and the blood were out in vast abundance on this night, as both Vince and Shane practically killed themselves over the course of their matches. After the Big Red Monster ultimately came out on top against the younger McMahon, it was he who later assisted Vince in defeating his brother The Undertaker in the main event. The moment symbolized the end of the biker era and set up Taker and Kane's Epic Mania rematch several months later. Ronda Rousey vs. Charlotte, Survivor Series 2018. Sometimes the wrestling gods step in, assert their power, and make sure all is right in the world. Becky Lynch got a concussion and a broken nose after an errant punch by Nia Jax on Raw, keeping her out of her scheduled showdown with Ronda Rousey at Survivor Series just days later. But while it initially seemed like a setback, booking Charlotte Flair as Becky's replacement was actually a blessing in disguise. Despite having zero build, the match was a whole ton of fun to watch because of the physicality on display. Charlotte snapped at the end and seemingly turned heel by beating the stuffing out of Ronda and some officials as well, only to be met with massive "Thank you, Charlotte" chants. Let's just say at this time, Ronda's likability was on the downward trend. The beating by Flair would be the impetus to push Ronda to her wrestling god-intended heel alignment, setting the course for one of the most important WrestleMania main events of all time. And my pick for the #1 best moment in Survivor Series history is the debuts. Yes, it's kind of cheating to lump these all into a singular entry, but damn it, if there's one thing that I love, it's a good debut, and Survivor Series throughout the years has had plenty of those. The Undertaker, The Rock, Kurt Angle, The Shield, some of the absolute biggest stars of wrestling's past and present, the most memorable characters, the most dominant champions, their journeys all began at this pay-per-view. It doesn't feel like a coincidence either. That period between November and March is a great stretch to introduce a new character and develop them in time for the biggest show of the year. And when you look at all of their first WrestleMania matches, it was clear those investments were paying off. And beyond those names, Survivor Series has a rich history of others making their first company appearances, like Sting in 2014, Jazz in 2001, the War Games match in 22, the aforementioned Elimination Chamber in 02, which also featured Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner's WWE return. No, it wasn't a debut since Scott had been there in the 90s with his brother Rick, but come on, by 2002, he was an entirely different human being. Some of them were modest, others more grandiose or dramatic. But no matter the scale, the Survivor Series has been the home of introducing new things to the wrestling landscape. And it's that trend of epic debuts that I consider to be the best collective moment of its history. But those are just my opinions, folks. What are your picks? Let me know in the comment section below. If I had to pick one or two of my favorite debuts out of that entire entry, I would say The Undertaker, and as far as the more modern debuts, definitely Sting, because whew, what a moment that was. Stay tuned for the end of this month when I give you my worst of Survivor Series countdown. But until then, be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to Wrestling with Regret if you haven't, hit that bell icon to get all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.